Wright. I'm the Director of Student Services, and thank you for joining us tonight. It is my honor to welcome Shane Watson. He is a Public Information Officer for notMYkid, sorry about that, and also serves as a prevention specialist for the organization. His responsibilities include hosting and producing notMYkid's Win This Year podcast, performing media appearances for the organization, overseeing notMYkid's social media presence, blogging, facilitating early intervention sessions for Project Rewind program, facilitating suicide intervention workshops, and performing prevention education presentations for students, parents, school faculty, and other community members. Shane originally joined notMYkid in January of 2013 as a student peer educator on the topic of substance use. In his time with the organization, he has performed over 500 speaking engagements to audience of over 100,000 at schools, corporations, conferences, community groups, and other venues in Arizona, California, Boston, Atlanta, and Kansas City. He has also made over 100 local and national media appearances, including television interviews on The Today Show, Good Day New York, and Kansas City Live. His writing credits include prevention articles for Katie Couric website, AZ Parenting Magazine, and Performer Magazine. Please welcome Shane Watson.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your time with me. My name is Shane Watson. As mentioned, I am the Public Information Officer for notMYkid and also a prevention specialist for the organization. I've been with notMYkid for 7 years, and in addition to my staff duties for the organization, I present on 4 topics: internet safety, bullying, a combination topic of depression, self-injury, and suicide, and substance use, under which the umbrella of this falls under substance use. My connection to the topic of substance use has 3 very distinct parts. First is professionally through my work with notMYkid. I've been with the organization 7 years. During those 7 years, I've had the opportunity to work with schools, students, families, and local and national behavioral health care professionals, through whom I've learned some very eye-opening things about substance use, the root causes of it, the long and short-term effects. Also professionally, I manage and facilitate Project Rewind, which is our organization's early intervention program. Several schools and school districts in the Valley refer their students to us, middle school and high school kids, if they are caught on campus under the influence with drugs or alcohol or with paraphernalia. So I'm working directly with middle school and high school students who have started down that path of experimentation. So I'm seeing firsthand what we are up against here locally. My second connection to this topic is a very personal one. I am in long-term recovery, 8+ years clean and sober, and I went from being a kid who was a straight-A student, a Boy Scout, an athlete, on paper, a healthy kid. I went from being that person to being someone who struggled with substance use for close to 2 decades. Became addicted to alcohol, cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin at points in combination. Ended up incarcerated twice, and as a result of the decisions I made the last night I drank or used, November 28, 2011, ended up a convicted felon and nearly lost my life. So to say that substance use had a profound effect on my life is not an overstatement. My third and final connection to this topic is the one that by far I am the most passionate about. Like many of you, I am a parent. I am the very proud dad of a strong, amazing, intelligent, stubborn little 7-year-old girl named Anna Grace, and she is everything to me, and she's also the reason why my eyes look so tired. Now, at 7 years old, vaping and e-cigarettes are not quite a reality in her world yet, but we are beginning to see kids starting to experiment at earlier and earlier ages. So I not only want to equip my family with the tools and the knowledge and the resources to prevent this, I want to do the same for you. Prevention works. We have seen the positive effects of it firsthand in schools, in families, in students right here in Arizona. And one more thing before we start, and this next statement might surprise you. This is not an anti-vaping or an anti-e-cigarette presentation. Now let me clarify. We are not looking to have these devices banned. We are not looking to have vape shops shut down when it comes to adult use. As we're going to talk about, these were invented as a harm reduction method for adults, a smoking cessation method. Remember that our organization is in the field of prevention for adolescents. We don't even comment on adult use. Based on the odds, based on the percentages, someone here, one of you adults, probably uses vapes or e-cigarettes. Keep in mind, in tonight's discussion, we are not commenting on you. We are talking about this being a health danger for middle school and high school kids, for youth. If you're not familiar with our organization, a little bit of background: we were founded 20 years ago in Scottsdale by a Scottsdale family, Debbie and Steve Moak, who had a son that by all outward appearances was the perfect kid, a scholar, an athlete, a student leader. And his parents didn't realize he was also struggling with substance use issues until he was in the grips of full-blown addiction. They got him help, got him on the road to recovery. The family's doing great. He's doing great today. But they felt like their job wasn't done. They said, we've addressed our family's issue, but how many other families are in this same situation? Great family who love their kids, but are blindsided by what's going on with their own kids. So we were founded around that initial topic that you see up at the top of substance use. We've since expanded out to include 6 total topics: body image, unhealthy relationships, bullying, digital behavior, also known as safe social media use, and a combination topic of depression, self-injury, and suicide. We speak on all 6 of these topics for 2 main reasons. Number one, you cannot walk into a middle school or high school in the state of Arizona without encountering students that are dealing with these. That's reality. Number two, through our work with local families, schools, students, and behavioral health care professionals, we've learned these are often interconnected. Very frequently, when we meet a young person that's struggling with one of these, they're struggling with another one, or they're at greater risk to deal with another one. We had a 7th grade girl last school year referred to our Project Rewind program who had been bullied on Instagram about her appearance by people she had considered friends and turned to alcohol as an escape. That's a crossover of 5 of those 6 topics in just one person's scenario. And as you see over here on the left, we try to reach school faculty, parents, grandparents, guardians, aunts and uncles, and students themselves, because no one of these groups should try to have to tackle all these issues on their own. But if we can educate and empower all these groups to work on the same page, as I said before, we can create change. We can save lives and we can improve lives. By the time we're done here tonight, we want to make sure we've answered these guiding questions for you. What are vapes and e-cigarettes? We're going to break down what's actually going on with these devices, because a lot of people don't even necessarily know what they do. I hear it referred to very frequently as smoking, and it's not smoking. It's actually something very different. Now, if you're already aware of how that works, great, you're ahead of the game, but we're going to break down the mechanics of it. Why were they created? For a very good reason, which we'll get into. How frequently are they being used by adolescents? And that's the concern. That's the focus of tonight's presentation. What are the reasons they're being used by middle school and high school students? If, as a parent, we find out our child is drinking or using, we want it to stop, but we also need to find out the why behind it. The motivation behind why a kid is drinking or using can begin to point you in the direction of a solution. We meet plenty of kids who are using or drinking to get a feeling. They want the buzz or the high or the euphoria. We are meeting an equal or greater amount in our early intervention program who are using to get away from a feeling. They are self-medicating anxiety, depression, and/or stress. What are the potential negative side effects? Why should we be concerned that kids are using these? And finally, what do we do about this? How do we prevent it? And if it's already occurring, how do we intervene? And if you are a stickler for sources, as I'm quoting statistics or information tonight, if you're wondering, is this coming from a reputable source or sources, the short answer is yes. Harvard, Berkeley National Labs, NIH, etc. So the reason why this has become our most requested topic, vaping, has to do with what you're seeing here. I mentioned facilitating an early intervention program. Now, we recently analyzed some data for the last 200 students who have gone through the program, all local Arizona Valley students, and this is what the breakdown looks like. 51% THC use, and we're not meeting kids that are smoking marijuana anymore. They are vaping THC concentrates. And a fairly close second, 32%, are vaping nicotine. Because of this breakdown, tonight we're not only going to be talking about kids vaping nicotine e-liquid or flavored e-liquid, but we're going to be talking about the effects of kids using THC concentrates. And this information right here comes from the Monitoring the Future survey, the MTF survey. This is done annually of 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders. What they do is they ask questions about drug and alcohol use and other risky behaviors. And you notice these columns here. Every column that you see that has an asterisk next to it not only increased in 2019 from 2018, if it has an asterisk, it increased significantly from the prior year. Vaping of nicotine increased. Any vaping increased. Marijuana and hash oil increased, and the only one that went down, that's what those caret symbols mean, a major decrease all the way at the end, kids just vaping the flavored e-liquid. So nicotine and THC vaping have gone up. So let's talk about it. What is vaping? As you see here, it's the act of inhaling an aerosol created by a liquid heated in a personal vaping device. A box mod vape, a Juul, a Soren, and we have models over here that you can take a look at when we're done talking tonight. By the way, this may sound a little bit funny. Please don't take my vapes home with you. I've had parents leave parent presentations with concealment devices and paraphernalia. Please make sure that you leave it here. It is not, by the way, smoking. I hear a lot of people use the term smoking. It is not actually burning something or the inhaling and exhaling of smoke. It is actually an aerosol, so it's actually not even a vapor either. It is an aerosol. And it can come in vape pens like this, although we're not seeing this very frequently when it comes to youth. We're seeing other devices much more frequently. We'll talk about those in a minute. But what is the liquid that's being heated and inhaled and exhaled? A lot of the kids that we talk to, the reason they have such a low perception of risk, they believe that this is harmless, is because a lot of middle school and high school students, when polled, will tell us, well, this is just water vapor. You cannot blow vapor clouds that big by inhaling and exhaling water vapor. What is in the e-liquid tends to be one or more of the ingredients that you see here. Now let's talk about propylene glycol, which we'll call PG from now on. Propylene glycol is a food additive. Now, people who will advocate for the safety of propylene glycol, advocate for the safety of vaping it, will tell you propylene glycol is approved by the FDA as safe. It is. For ingestion, not for inhaling. Ingesting something and inhaling something are two very different things. Propylene glycol is a food additive that is put in pre-packaged, shrink-wrapped foods that are going to be sitting on store shelves for a prolonged period of time to keep moisture out of them, to keep them from spoiling. Other people will also advocate for the safety of PG by telling you propylene glycol is used in asthma inhalers, so how could it be dangerous? One very key difference, asthma inhalers do not heat the propylene glycol. Vapes and e-cigarettes do. When you heat propylene glycol to the temperature to which these devices get up to, propylene glycol produces a byproduct chemical or multiple byproduct chemicals that are not there at room temperature. Those byproduct chemicals have been shown to be cancer-causing and damaging to the lungs. Now, vegetable glycerin, known as VG, a lot of people will advocate for it being safer than propylene glycol. Is it safer? Yes. Is it completely safe when we're talking about youth? Is it completely without consequence? No, and I'll give you an example. If you know someone who vapes e-liquid, primarily or solely made of VG, have them take about a half dozen hits and blow them onto a glass plate, onto a window, onto a glass Arcadia door, right up on it, about a half dozen hits. After they do that, take your finger and run it through the residue where they've blown those hits and look at the residue, the glistening residue left on your finger. Now keep in mind, you're seeing that on your finger, and the person, the child, the middle schooler or high schooler that's inhaling that is taking that into their lungs, and you're seeing the result of a half dozen hits. Multiply that out over how many hits someone's taking per day, per week, per month, per year, and remember, that is going into the lungs. Nicotine is optional, but the majority of kids that we're meeting are vaping either nicotine e-liquid or a THC concentrate, as you saw in that Monitoring the Future study earlier. Flavor is optional, but flavor is the reason 80% of kids said that they started, and then water is sometimes used to change the viscosity, the thickness. Now, a moment ago, we showed the vape pen, which is how this originated, but we're actually starting to see that much less. And as parents, you've probably long heard about the Juul e-cigarette, which for a very long time was the most popular e-cigarette or vaping device with middle school and high school kids. It was easy to get, it was easy to hide, it was a big social media status. You could make a big production of having your Juul on Instagram, Snapchat, etc. But Juul can no longer produce the flavors that they used to produce. If you're familiar with the news that's been happening recently, they have banned Juul from making any flavors other than tobacco flavor and menthol. And I don't know a lot of middle school and high school kids who want to vape menthol or tobacco flavor. So as parents, a lot of us saw this, a lot of people saw this and thought, okay, good, the problem's been legislated away, it's been done away with. Well, also in recent years, we were seeing the Soren drop and we were seeing the Soren Air. Now, when we thought that this was being legislated away, the surprise that came up on the horizon was something called the puff bar. Now, this has made the national news within the last couple weeks because, as you will see down here in the last paragraph, a footnote on page 9 of the new policy that banned pod systems, flavored pod systems like Juul, allows flavors to still be made if it is in a disposable device. So as parents, if we're still looking for the Soren Drop, the Soren Air, if we're still looking for the Juul, we are looking for the wrong thing. We have 3 puff bars up here on this bag for you to look at before you leave that were given to me by a school resource officer locally. And I asked him, we're seeing this nationally, are you seeing this locally? And he said, absolutely. The Juul is beginning to phase out very rapidly. The Soren Drop and the Soren Air are beginning to phase out very rapidly. And now what we are starting to see is the puff bar. In all of the same flavors that you could get before, in a very similar style to the Juul, with the equivalent amount of nicotine, 5% nicotine. So to give you an idea of what 5% nicotine equates to when it comes to cigarettes, let's put it in terms of tobacco, we may be more familiar with that. 5% nicotine is the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes. Now, I have a lot of parents or educators ask me, how long does it take someone to go through one of these? That's going to depend on how long they've been vaping, what their tolerances are like, etc. Some kids, it can last them quite a while. Some kids will be through one in a day or two. So you may have noticed that the subtitle of this presentation was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it may surprise you that a prevention organization has something good to say about vaping. But the truth is, it was invented for a very good reason. It was invented by a Chinese pharmacist in 2003. And he had been a smoker, and he quit smoking by using nicotine patches, but he missed the feeling of smoking. His father had been a smoker, and his father had died by lung cancer. So this pharmacist developed the e-cigarette. Numerous adults have used these devices to move from tobacco to e-cigarettes, taper down their nicotine levels over time, and eventually quit entirely. That is a harm reduction method. That is a smoking cessation method. Having said that, I have yet to meet the middle school or high school student who is using these to quit smoking. Most often, they're the entry point into substance use now. Years ago, typically students would start with cigarettes, and then alcohol, and then marijuana. What we're seeing now is e-cigarettes, THC concentrates, and alcohol is now coming in third. Other good news is that teen smoking is declining. Teen smoking is at the lowest it has been since 1991, when they started formally taking data from high school students about smoking. That's fantastic. Well, now let's talk about the bad. As I mentioned earlier, not only are kids not using these typically to quit smoking, they're 6 times more likely to go on to smoke cigarettes anyway if they start using e-cigarettes or vapes. This is from a study done by the University of Southern California. Whatever reason a student starts, whether it's curiosity, peer pressure, boredom, flavors, once that nicotine takes hold, nicotine is a very addictive substance. It is very difficult to quit. The withdrawal symptoms are horrendous. And that person finds out, man, if I don't have my Juul pods, I feel awful, but if I steal my grandpa's cigarettes, I don't feel that way. They're 6 times more likely to go on to smoke anyway. And they are successful buying e-cigarettes online 94% of the time. Because typically, age verification online involves a checkbox. Yes, I'm 18 years old. That is typically the extent of age verification online. And then finally, the craziest looking statistic, and this is not a typo, teen use in the United States increased by 900% between 2011 and 2015. We are continuing to see on the graph of this, it is continuing to climb. The hope is that in the next few years, the education and the prevention can catch up with it. We'll see it plateau and eventually begin to decline. So we talked about the what. Now let's talk about the why. And I'd like to take answers from a few of you if you're willing to raise your hand and answer. And this is not a right-wrong thing. I'm not looking for a specific answer. I'd like to hear your experience as grandparents, as parents, as educators. Why do teens vape? Why is it popular? So they can be cool in front of their friends. Meanwhile, smoking could not be less cool. You've seen the decline, the lowest it's been since 1991. Smoking could not be less popular. Meanwhile, e-cigarettes and vapes are a big status symbol still on social media to try to be cool in front of their friends. Absolutely. Anybody else? Why do teens vape? Right here. because they like the flavor. As I mentioned earlier, there was a poll done, there's actually been multiple polls done that indicate about 80% of students who started vaping did so because of the flavors, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. We could answer this question for the entire time we have here tonight, not give one wrong answer, and not exhaust the entire list of reasons why. There tend to be a lot of reasons why people will vape, students will vape, but we'll notice that many of the answers will tend to fall in one of the broad categories that you see here. Now, appealing flavors was mentioned. Peer pressure was something similar to peer pressure. To be cool, to fit in was mentioned. But I'm going to draw your attention to two things on this list: social media influence and advertising. Now, this is an article, if you can see the date up here in the corner, January 22nd of this year. Now, back in the day, the concern was, what about advertising to kids, whether it was tobacco advertising or alcohol advertising? There's still some of that that's going on, and we'll talk about it here in a minute, but what we're seeing much more often now is the appeal coming from influencers, social media influencers on Instagram, and the FDA is seeing that this is so frequent that they're making this big display on their Instagram, on their TikTok, wherever they have these millions of followers, without mentioning the actual potential downside to it. And it's not just occurring on Instagram, although that's one of the biggest places. And if you see down here, researchers have discovered that Instagram posts that promote the use of e-cigarettes and vapes outnumber anti-vaping content by a shocking ratio of 10,000 to 1. This article just came out a couple weeks ago. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's not just Instagram, it's also happening on TikTok. As you can see, this trending hashtag vape tricks, almost 300 million views on TikTok. By the way, for you parents, chances are if your parents are middle schoolers or high schoolers, you're already very familiar with TikTok. If you are not, I highly recommend that you research it as well. So they're having this not just promoted by friends or peers at school, but people that they look up to on social media. And they may be seeing it through advertising. Now, we as adults here, those of you who are parents or grandparents, remember as recently as the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the American public's battle against the tobacco industry. An industry that lied about the dangers of their products, used manipulative advertising practices. We remember that. We lived through that. Students who were not around for that may not be familiar with it unless we've had a deliberate conversation with them about that. Well, there's some familiar names who hooked prior generations on nicotine who are back now with new nicotine-containing products, and they have a new target market, which is youth. But see if this looks similar side by side. What we have on the left is we're going to have a series of old-school cigarette ads, tobacco ads. On the right, we're going to pair them up with modern-day e-cigarette ads. We'll have underneath each the year that the advertisement was released, and at the top we will have the old, tired advertising cliche that's being recycled once again to sell a new nicotine-containing product. So side by side, we got the tough guy, the Marlboro Man kind of look. Leisure and lifestyle, 1964 on the cigarette ad, 2013 on the e-cigarette ad. Look at the convertible, look at the pose. Sex appeal, look at the dress, look at the pose. We're going back to 1930, the cigarette ad. Nightlife and romance, look at the composition of these two ads side by side. Celebrity endorsement, okay, Stephen Dorff over there on the right, not that big of a celebrity. He made some movies back in the 90s, we'll count it, technically a celebrity. Girl power, look at the airplane, look at the pose, going back to 38 on the cigarette ad. Fruit and other flavors, so they've borrowed this from the tobacco company playbook as well. And any flavor that you can think of, you can find an e-liquid in that flavor. Here we've got Vivid Vanilla, Cherry Crush, Caramel Cuddles, Banana Cream Pie, Sweet Fruit Punch, Cotton Candy, Luscious Watermelon. There's also a company in New York that claims to make an organic churro-flavored e-liquid. I don't know how you get organic churro-flavored e-liquid, but there is a company in New York that claims to make it. You can find a flavor, any flavor you can think of. So how did this happen? Is this just a matter of ad agencies connecting with e-cigarette companies and saying, hey, these ad cliches work, let's do this again? Or is it because there's some familiar names behind these new devices? So up here at the top, we have the Tobacco Corporation. They're now called Altria. Most of you probably will remember them being called Philip Morris. They've rebranded. The old name had some negative connotation. They own Marlboro, Parliament, and Virginia Slims. Very recognizable cigarette brands. They own Green Smoke, Mark 10, and more than a 1/3 stake in Juul. Tobacco Corporation that fooled us once before, back with new products. Then we have Imperial Tobacco, which owns Winston, Salem, Kool, and Maverick, recognizable cigarette brands. They own Blue, another major e-cigarette brand called out by name 2 summers ago by the Food and Drug Administration as marketing directly to kids. And then finally, Lorillard, which you'll probably remember the name R.J. Reynolds. They have rebranded as Altria did. They own these cigarette brands, and they own Vuse e-cigarettes. So it's the same people who were dishonest with us previously, and we're expecting them to, once again, to be honest this time around. They fooled us once before, and they have a new target market with new nicotine-containing products. So maybe we're at this point and you're thinking, okay, so big evil tobacco corporations. What is the actual danger involved? What is the actual harm for youth? Number one, if they're vaping nicotine e-liquid, nicotine can be addictive to anyone of any age. But here is what we see in middle school and high school students that we don't see in adult users. Problems with memory, attention, and learning. Because their brains are still developing if you put a stimulant in the mix up there, which nicotine is a stimulant. They can have difficulties with memory, attention, and learning. When you are a middle school or a high school student, it is hard enough to remember everything you have to remember for your tests, for your quizzes, for your homework or projects that you're working on. Adding nicotine into the mix can make that even more difficult. What about just the flavored e-liquid? Well, the short-term research that is scrambling to catch up with this fairly new technology has found that it can cause permanent lung damage. And finally, to me, what you see here under vaping in general, lack of long-term research. We just had the first long-term study on vaping ever come out a couple months ago. Other than that, we have no long-term research. You cannot have long-term research on something that just became commercially available in 2003. We have the benefit of decades of research on things like alcohol or marijuana or street drugs or prescription drugs. Let's say a young person was using cocaine for 6 months and they hadn't had any health issues. And they went to their physician and their physician asked them, do you use alcohol or drugs? And they disclosed, yes, I use cocaine, I've been doing it for 6 months, haven't had any health problems. Based on the long-term research we have, that physician could project out and say, well, based on the long-term research, 6 months down the road, this might happen to you. A year down the road, you're probably going to encounter this. This is a giant question mark. So just because a young person is not encountering health difficulties in the short term does not guarantee they're not going to have issues in the long run. One of the most telling and eye-opening things that I've seen about the lack of long-term research came when I was doing some research myself on the internet. And I was reading a pro-vaping forum. Everyone that posts in there not only is in favor of vaping, they all do it. They were all trading tips on how to customize their big box mod vapes. So somebody starts a thread in the forum, and he mentions, hey, I just started doing this about 6 months ago. None of the stuff they warned me about, the lung stuff or whatever, none of that's happened. What might I be looking at down the road? So a guy replies to him, and the guy that replies to him vapes himself. As a matter of fact, in his forum signature, he's got a picture of his box mod vape. And this guy, who's all in favor of it, he does it himself, was honest enough and real enough to reply to the gentleman with this quote, and this is not a paraphrasing, this is verbatim, "We don't know. We are the lab rats. We are the generation this is being tested on. We are the lab rats. We are the generation this is being tested on." Now, as adults, if we want to enter into this, understanding the potential gravity that we may suffer health issues down the road, so be it. But a young person that lacks the adult brain development that we have to weigh those future consequences, that's a stacked deck. That is unfair. And we're starting to see it now as the primary way that THC is used. Tetrahydrocannabinol, one of the many active compounds in marijuana, the one most responsible for the high, but also the damage to the developing brain. We are not meeting very many kids that are smoking marijuana. If we're picturing a joint or bong hits, we're way past that point now. What we're meeting is we're meeting kids who are using dab pens or wax pens. And by the way, it looks like this. Some parents we've met haven't found the dab pens, haven't found the wax pens, but they've actually found the dabs themselves in little containers that almost look like little Carmex containers. Or you can find a preloaded dab cartridge where the e-liquid that has the THC concentrate in it can be connected to a permanent vape pen with a disposable dab cartridge, or it can look like wax, which actually looks like wax. This is a THC concentrate. So if your teen comes home one night, or they're in their room, and you see the bloodshot eyes, the dilated pupils, you can tell something's not right. If you're looking around and you're looking for buds, if you're looking for a dime bag or you're looking for a quarter ounce, this is more what we need to be focusing on at this point. And these are the signs and symptoms that you're going to want to look for. Now, most of these are self-explanatory, what these signs and symptoms mean, but let me hone in on one that you may not be familiar with: lack of eye convergence. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed, if you've ever seen on TV when law enforcement does DUI stops, they're not just testing for the presence of alcohol, they're testing for what's called DUID, driving under the influence of drugs. One of the tests that they will do is where they will take a pen or their fingertip or any type of stimulus, and they will do a circle around the person's face, have them hold their face still, and follow the movement with their eyes. And after making a couple circles, the law enforcement officer will move it away and then bring it slowly in about an inch away from their nose and tell them to look at it with their eyes. Generally, people who are not under the influence of marijuana or under the influence of depressants or inhalants will cross their eyes as the finger or the stimulus gets right here. Under the influence of THC, eye convergence does not occur correctly. And here is why you keep hearing me mention brain development. Why THC, nicotine, prescription drugs, street drugs, alcohol, why it all affects our kids very differently and in a much more damaging way than it does us. Anyone in here willing to raise their hand and answer, or just shout it out, or guess, at what age does the human brain stop developing, finish maturing? You all got it, 25. It's actually a range, 21 to 25, but research is beginning to point toward the higher end of it, 25 years of age. And the last portion to develop is the prefrontal cortex. It is instrumental in higher decision making, weighing future consequences, impulse control. So for you parents that have preteens and teens, if you have found yourself at some point saying to them, "Why did you do that?" thinking you would never do it, their manager is not online yet. Knowing that we have to be the prefrontal cortex for our teens. It's not a matter of if they're going to be offered something, they will. It's a matter of when. And if they haven't game planned it or role played it or talked through it and planned it out with you in that moment of crisis where a friend at a party is like, "Here, hit this wax pen," if they haven't thought it out, they are more likely to go into autopilot and say, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that with you." They tend to, in the preteen and teen years, gravitate toward things they think are going to feel good without considering the consequences. We as adults will look at a piece of chocolate cake and we'll say, "That looks amazing, but I'm going to spend 3 hours in the gym working that off." We do that pros and cons list naturally because we have the fully developed prefrontal cortex. Until the age it is developed, we can't fall into that not my kid mentality. We can't say, "My son's a great kid." I believe he is. "My daughter's really smart." I believe she is. But even the best, the brightest, the most loving and talented and conscientious kids from great families can still be prone to impulsive decisions because there's a physiological reason. So we can't disconnect from this and say, "Oh, I never need to sit down and have that talk." They would never do that. Prepare them with it anyway, just in case. And to sum up what we have discussed so far, and this will be the AV.
The largest major review of the research on e-cigs was published in the American Heart Association's Scientific Journal. In their research, the scientists found formaldehyde, propylene glycol, and lead amongst other well-known toxins in the vapor. Sound familiar? It's just like cigarettes. UC San Francisco's Tobacco Research Center stated that e-cigs do not deliver pure nicotine and harmless water vapor. It may not have tobacco in it, but the e-cigs are still delivering the same carcinogens that are known to cause chronic disease and cancer, and the secondhand vapor is emitting it as well. Then there's the most disturbing part of the study to me. A growing number of middle and high schoolers report having tried e-cigs instead of cigarettes.
Users under 18 has more than tripled in the U.S.
You like the nicotine.
Yeah,
You like the way it makes you feel.
At 15 years old, Via Puget is one of at least 2 million teens who've tried or are using electronic cigarettes. According to a recent study, e-cigarettes have surpassed traditional cigarette use among teens. But inside the battery-powered plastic device is liquid containing nicotine, masked by a rainbow of flavors attractive to younger customers.
Nicotine is not a benign compound, and nicotine can be harmful to the still developing brain of the adolescent, and nicotine is addictive.
That's the head of Blue e-cigarettes.
Are you marketing to children?
No, I am not.
But the parent company of Blue, Lorillard, has a website saying kids may be vulnerable to trying flavors like cherry, vanilla, and pina colada.
Increasingly, Big Tobacco is manufacturing these e-cigarettes, tapping into the booming market. According to watchdog site Open Secrets, among the biggest players, Lorillard, Altria, the parent company of Philip Morris, and Reynolds American together have spent nearly $22 million in the last year and a half lobbying Congress.
The flavors and ads like this
Friends don't let friends smoke.
have critics calling foul, saying the industry that fooled Americans once about the effects of smoking is trying to hook kids on nicotine again.
And by the way, the tobacco corporations and the tobacco industry aren't only the ones behind the advertisements that we saw, the print ads, the magazine ads. They are also paying many of the influencers. There's articles that have come out in the last few weeks talking about the amount of influencers that Juul was paying to make a big production, a big show of using Juuls on Instagram, on social media. So what do we do about this? First and foremost, get familiar with the signs and symptoms associated with substance use. And if you grabbed your packets on the way in that were out there in the lobby, there is a page that has some of the signs and symptoms. The easiest way to break it down is this. You know your kids and the kids in your life better than probably just about anyone knows them. You know what is normal for them. Normal tone of voice, body language, facial expression, level of eye contact. You know how they carry themselves when they come in the door from school. Anyone can have one off day or two off days. But if you're seeing multiple changes in behavior over a prolonged period of time, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sit down and have a conversation and find out what is going on. Is it related to substance use? Are they going through depression? Are they dealing with relationship issues? But it's up to us to recognize that and to sit down and have that conversation. It's also important to recognize signs and symptoms specific to vaping and e-cigarettes. Now, the unexplained smells is probably obvious because of the flavors of the e-liquid. However, I'll tell you this, if you're banking on being able to catch it through the smell, good luck, because the amount of smell put out by a Juul or a puff bar is far lower than the amount of smell put out by a cigarette. The amount of vapor put out by a Juul or a puff bar dissipates very quickly versus the way smoke from a cigarette lingers. Now, increased thirst and nosebleeds. The reason these symptoms are associated with vaping has to do with propylene glycol, which we talked about earlier. As I mentioned, it is used to dry up foods, to keep moisture out of food, to keep it from spoiling. That propylene glycol, when vaped, can dry out the mucous membranes and can dry out the mouth. And then you see caffeine sensitivity. Some people who begin using nicotine develop a sensitivity to caffeine. Not everyone, but some do. If you have a teen who never starts their day without a Rockstar, a Monster, a Red Bull, and suddenly they're foregoing all caffeine and you're seeing some of the other symptoms we talked about, that may be pointing in the direction of using vapes or e-cigarettes. And the rest on this list are probably pretty self-explanatory. Now here is one that is a little less common. If you get on YouTube and you look up the phrase DIY Juul, do-it-yourself Juul, you will find videos explaining how to take a USB to micro USB cord and modify it. And the way it works is you keep the USB end intact, you cut the micro USB end, and you'll notice that there's green wires and black and white wires. If they are stripped and the black and white are twisted together with the wires exposed, red and green twisted together with the wires exposed, what someone can do is they can take a Juul pod. They can plug the intact USB end into a laptop or another power source, like a phone charger battery, and touch the two exposed wires to the metal plates on the Juul pod and can hit it straight out of the pod without having to pay for the Juul device, which is the most expensive part of it, having to hide it from their parents, And when the pods are done, they're easy to dispose of. They're easy to hide. They're easy to get rid of. Fortunately, I was already familiar with this when we had a mom of an 8th grade girl come in our office. And she came in with a backpack, and she said, I found something in my daughter's room, and I'm concerned about it, and I'm hoping you can help me understand what it is. So she opens the backpack and dumps it on my desk, and 25 of these, in this condition, fall out. And she said, my daughter's telling me, I just keep breaking them, but they're all modified in a very specific way, red and green together, black and white together, stripped wires. And I told the mom, I explained exactly what it was. So she went home and talked to her daughter again. Her daughter owned up to the fact that that's what they were. She had been buying them at the 99-cent store by Paradise Valley Mall, modifying them and selling them to her middle school classmates for $5 each. That is a future business owner. That is an entrepreneurial spirit. If we can harness that and direct it in a positive way, that kid's going to change the world someday. Not only can it be used to hit the Juul pod directly without actually owning a Juul, that same modified wire can be used to charge a Juul if you've lost your charger. So that wire will be down there for you to check out afterward. Okay, so what do we do about this? What are the solutions? Number one, get on the same page with your spouse or partner. If you have a spouse or a partner involved in the raising of your child or children, get on the same page. If a kid is hearing one thing from one parent and something conflicting from the other parent regarding the rules around drugs and alcohol, that conflicting message increases the likelihood that they are going to use. A unified message, a consistent message, is a protective factor that decreases the likelihood that they're going to use. And where do we have these conversations? At the dinner table. Casa Columbia, Columbia University Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse, does an annual study on the importance of regular family dinners, meaning at least 4 days a week, preferably 5 or more, where the devices are put away, we're not doing this the whole time, the TV is turned off, and we're actually engaging and connecting with one another as a family. They have found that families that intentionally, regularly set this time aside have lower rates of teen substance use and other behavioral and mental health issues. Now, if dinner at dinner time doesn't work for you because of your work schedule or your child's sports or extracurricular schedule, you can modify this. Find other 1-hour periods that you can set aside during the week where you do an activity that lends itself to having a conversation. Watching a movie together is not a good one. Playing a game together, working on a project together. We had a dad that went through our Project Rewind program, and I saw him about 1.5 years later. He's a single dad of a 16-year-old son. And I was doing a school presentation like this, and he came up and talked to me afterward. He said, hey, good to see you again. We loved Project Rewind. I want to talk to you about that dinner thing. My son and I tried it, and it was 2 guys awkwardly staring at each other from across a dinner table. It was weird. But here's what worked. When we went out in the garage together and we were working with our hands on projects on the old truck side by side, not across from each other, that's where my son opened up. That's where he started talking. I had a mom whose 8th grade son, she said, I can't get him to sit still for dinner. She said, what we do is we go out for walks. And when he's out moving around, and once again, we're side by side, and I got him out moving around, that's where he opens up. You know your kids, you know the environments where they're likely to open up and the environments where they're likely to shut down. You can modify this creatively and make it work for you. And here, the final 6 tips. 2 summers ago, our Chief Programs Officer, Geronda Montano, was interviewed by the Huffington Post. Geronda is a 20-year veteran of the prevention field. And Huffington Post said if you were to take everything you've learned in those 20 years and narrow it down to 6 tips for parents related to substance use prevention, what would they be? And we have them here. They're very plain because we want the content to stand out. Number 1, start talking to your kids when they're young. The average age of experimentation with drugs or alcohol in the United States is 12 years old. That's the average age. If we are going to truly be preventative, we need to start having those conversations prior to those years. Now, we've already talked about family dinners, but maybe you recognize there's a week, a 2-week, a 3-week, 2-month period where you look at your schedule and you say, my work schedule and your school schedule, your sports schedule, that's not going to let us have these 1-hour activities. Maybe you realize the window of opportunity you have is what you see here when picking them up from school. Maybe you recognize, wow, this 15-minute car ride to and from school, or this 20-minute car ride to and from sports practice, This is the only opportunity we're going to get to talk for these next few weeks, to really uninterrupted have a conversation. Make that car ride a car ride where the phones are put away. Now, if you've never done this before, the first time you ask your teen to put their phone away in the vehicle, you may get some resistance. We had a family that went through Project Rewind that said the first time they asked their 16-year-old daughter to put her phone away during a car ride, they said, you would have thought we had dipped her in boiling oil. I got to put my phone away. Even though she made it uncomfortable for them, they stuck with it. They were diplomatic and they were gentle about it, but they said, yes, we want you to put it away. As they did that on subsequent car rides, they noticed that her reaction was less and less extreme. About a month and a half into it, they said she started self-regulating her device use more. And about 3 months into it, they noticed her anxiety beginning to decrease. And they realized that at least a portion of her anxiety came from the constant device checking and the constant alerts, and I have to do this, and I got to post this, and I have to respond to this. And then at the bottom, every day, ask them 2 questions. What was your favorite thing about today? What was your least favorite thing about today? To start the conversation in a non-conflict manner. Now, please don't hit your kids with these questions the moment they get in the car from school or the moment they walk in the door from school. I've had a lot of students tell me, hey, I get what my parents are trying to do with the questions. It's great. When I get the car or I get home, I need like 15 minutes to just decompress. And we feel the same way as adults. So do this, but don't hit them with it right when they get in the car. Number 2, be clear about your rules and your expectations related to drugs and alcohol. A lot of times we assume, oh, no, my son knows the rules, or my daughter knows what I think about vaping. Better that we sit down and we have that conversation one more time and we be abundantly clear than to assume they know and have there be any gray area or any confusion. I know as parents of preteens or teens, you have probably found yourself at some point asking your child 6 times to take out garbage. And you're saying to yourself, I know I've already told you to do this. But it is until that 6th or 7th time that the message clicks and they actually follow up on it. In behavioral health with youth, there is a concept known as dosage. It is the repetition of a message in order for it to sink in. This is no different. Have this conversation multiple times. How do you have the conversation? It seems like not a week goes by without a local or national news report or incident related to drugs or alcohol. When that's on the TV, when that's in the newspaper, when you're pulling that up on your news app, that's an organic window to begin that conversation. What do you think about this? Ask them a question. Ask them what they think about it, and let them talk. Listen and let them talk. Number 3, understand the teenage brain. Know that they are physiologically wired to be impulsive and take risk. In the early elementary years, 1st, 3rd, 2nd, 3rd grade, both the pleasure-seeking part of the brain and the logic-driven part have not matured. In the teen years, in the preteen years, the part that seeks out pleasurable activities has come online, but as we mentioned earlier, the prefrontal cortex, which controls impulsive decisions, has not fully matured yet. There is a reason we see in those preteen and teen years kids starting to gravitate toward things they think are going to make them feel good without thinking of what's the potential downside. And as you see here, help them find positive activities to achieve the feelings they're seeking. Now, I mentioned earlier about finding out the why. If they've been drinking or using, asking them why. An equally important question is what? What have they been using? Because knowing what they've been gravitating toward will let you know what types of natural activities can replace that or get that neurotransmitter release naturally. On the end of the spectrum where kids are gravitating towards stimulants, nicotine is a stimulant, cocaine, methamphetamine, if they're taking Adderall that they're not prescribed for ADHD, some other kid's medication, to get the euphoria, the buzz. People who like that dopamine release, that rush, that energetic high can benefit from things like martial arts, extreme sports, skateboarding, that allows them that dopamine release and that adrenaline rush naturally. On the opposite end, if they're gravitating toward things like alcohol, benzodiazepines, Valium, Klonopin, Xanax, opioids, THC, marijuana, THC concentrates, trying to bring themselves down, they can benefit from things like yoga or meditation. Now, I'll tell you now, if your child is used to tossing down a 2 milligram Xanny bar and in 15 minutes the universe seems perfect, the first time they do yoga, it's not going to equal that. But over time, as someone is no longer tampering with their neurotransmitters and they begin to balance out, they can achieve those releases of dopamine and serotonin through natural activities. Find what they love to do. Find what lets them feel good and lets them also work out that anxiety that they're dealing with. Number 4, I love this. Agree on a code word that they can text you and you will come and get them, no questions asked. Now, no questions asked doesn't mean that if there needs to be correction or consequences later on that you don't apply that. What no questions asked means is if they're at a party and they're under the influence, they're about to pass out at a party under the influence, they're about to get in a vehicle with someone behind the wheel under the influence, or they're about to drive under the influence, all that matters in that moment is their health and their safety in keeping them alive. There will be time later to apply correction or consequences. So the way that this works involves a code word or a code phrase, and teens like this because it does not look like they're being rescued. They are hesitant in front of a group of their peers to call and say, Dad, I need you to come get me. Mom, I'm at a party, things are getting weird. They're afraid to do that because they can't save face with peers. So you agree on a code word or a code phrase that if a peer see them texting it, it looks like nothing, but you know what it means. Well, you need to know where they are, so you call them back. And some families I've seen use this scenario where the parent calls back and they say, where are you? You had like 6 chores you were supposed to do tonight. None of them are done. I need to come get you. And they can say to their friends, oh, I'm in trouble again. Oh, my mom's so uncool. Or I know one family that went to the extreme that when the mom received the code word from her daughter, the one time her daughter took her up on the offer, the mom called and said, where are you? Your aunt is in the hospital. We need to go to the ER right now. Where are you? I need to pick you up. So agree on that code word in advance. Number 5, oh, by the way, let me back up. As far as no questions asked, you can even take that a step further. There is a parent that we work with sometimes. We work with a lot of parents, some parents of recovering addicts that speak for us. And there's a lady by the name of Pam who speaks for us sometimes. And her daughters took her up on this offer one time. And she said, I picked them up at the agreed meeting place where they told me to come get them. And they got in the car, and I kind of gave them one of these. And I just started driving, and I said nothing. And that silence drove them nuts. And within 5 minutes, they were telling me everything I would have asked about had I asked any questions. So sometimes the power is not in our words. Sometimes the power is in the silence that we allow. Number 5, and I love this one too, decide on consequences together with your child. Now, this may sound counterintuitive. I'm supposed to let them pick their own consequence? Until you think of it this way. They may suggest something that you hear and you think, oh, yeah, that's way better than what I came up with. Yeah, let's put that down. We as adults, we think very big picture with our consequences. When you heard in my introduction that I have a permanent felony, that I was incarcerated, that I nearly lost my life, we hear legal problems and debt, and we hear felony and all that, and we say, wow, that would make me not want to do that. Teens can often disconnect from that because they see it and they say, well, that's never going to happen to me. I said that, and everyone I've met in recovery said that as a teen. What often resonates with them are immediate short-term consequences that click in the world that they live in. And they all start with the letter C. Credit card, cash, cell phone, curfew, computer, car. Credit card, cash, cell phone, curfew, computer, car, or the restriction thereof. So if they come home smelling like alcohol, you can tell that they're drunk. You sit down with them, you have the conversation, you find out the why, you find out the what, you maintain your composure. But then you say, hey, you know what? Remember what the rules were and what the consequences we talked about. I'm going to move your curfew. I'm moving it from 11 p.m. to 7 p.m. They can then make that immediate cause and effect association. When I come home drunk, I get my curfew moved up. When I do this, this happens. I don't like how this feels. Maybe I shouldn't do this. They can make that immediate cause and effect association. Doesn't mean don't talk to them about the big consequences. If addiction runs in your family, if alcoholism runs in your family, that genetic component increases the likelihood that that child will go down that path if they choose to drink or use. If they know someone personally who's lived through it, use that as an example because that makes it real. It's not somebody in a book, it's not somebody on a TV show. That makes it much more real to them. But include the consequences that they choose and include those short-term ones. And then if you ever have to apply the consequences, which are not fun, nobody enjoys doing it, you can say, not only did I show you the respect of making sure we were clear in advance what would happen if you broke this rule, I actually let you pick this consequence. You made an informed decision. And number 6, this is everything in prevention. This is everything. Keep communication lines open. Even if they are raising their voice to us, which we don't want and it's not ideal, that is still preferable to a preteen or teen who is disconnected, they've isolated, they've shut down, and we can't get anything from them. That is a scary place to be. And even if they come in all emotional and hot and worked up, and they're up here all charged up, don't meet them up there. You come in down here. Maintain your pitch, your meter, your rate of speech, your volume. Now, I'm not telling you that the first time that your teen is all worked up and you talk calmly, they're going to immediately calm down. But there are some very amazing verbal de-escalation techniques that can work. There's some great tutorials on the internet. Yes, I'm advocating that you as parents implement skills implemented by law enforcement. They can work. And while we're maintaining this communication, be conscious of your tone of voice, your posture, your body language, and your facial expression. Depending on what research you read, as much as 93% of the message that is conveyed is often not in our words, it's in our nonverbals. Tone of voice, body language, facial expression, etc. And now this sounds exaggerated until you think of it this way. Imagine I'm a dad. I've got my son sitting right here. We have a great relationship. We love each other very much. But I just found out that he's doing something I'm not okay with. I'm really scared. I'm worried for his safety. And I say this to him. Do you know what? I love you. Do you understand that? The words were, I love you. That's what I said. Is that the message I just sent? No. Dad's raising his voice. Dad's hovering. I like to have these conversations sitting down. Maintain eye contact. Allow them to break it. Sit in a proximity that shows that you're there with them. Don't check your phone. Don't check your watch. Be there in that moment with them. And for teens or preteens who are struggling with quitting, this is a resource that they can text. And there is text support that they can get to quit, to eventually be able to stop entirely. But parents of teens or preteens who want to know what they can do to help their teen quit, this is a resource you can use. We've spoken with some local physicians recently who've said to us, this is now becoming a thing at my pediatric practice where I'm having to help kids figure out how to taper off of nicotine. And they're saying, I've never seen this with the frequency that I'm seeing this now, because kids are starting with Juul or they're starting with nicotine e-liquid because they like the buzz, not understanding how hard that is going to be to quit. So if you grabbed one of the packets on your way in, on the next to last page, there is a double-sided page that on one side of the page says taking action, and it has a list of checkboxes. It's on the next to last page. And on the opposite side of that page, it has a list of blanks, and it says our family prevention plan. If you have a spouse or a partner involved in the raising of your child or children, sit down as adults first. Sit down with your spouse or your partner and go through the taking action list and check off the ones you want to incorporate and cross out if there's any ones you don't want to use. Then flip that over and customize it to meet your needs, your principles, your values, your guidelines, your living situation, the age of your kids, the maturity of your kids. Once you've agreed upon that plan as adults, then present it to your teen. Take them to dinner, make them their favorite dinner, and bring it and say, we feel like we owe it to you to be clear what we expect of you and what you can expect of us. What do you think of this? Let them amend it. Let them add to it, because if you let them be part of the process, you'll get more buy-in from them. It'll feel less dictated to them. But I ask that you not let them cross out anything that you've put on there. Then come to an agreement, because if the rules are clear, they're concise, they're consistent, they're understood, and they're agreed upon in advance, you are less likely to have an incident and you are more likely to have a positive outcome. Now, no prevention plan is perfect, but if you are intentional about forming the plan as a family, using those 6 tips from Geronda, setting aside those family dinners or regular communication times, incorporating all those pieces, the more pieces you put in place into a prevention plan, the more pieces you put into that puzzle, the higher the likelihood that you're going to have success. And we have some free drug test kits for you over here from First Check. They test for 14 different drugs, 7 illicit, 7 prescription, results in 5 minutes in the privacy of your own home between parent and child. One of the substances that this does not test for, however, is nicotine, which is why we're showing you this. Express Drug Test is a company based in the Scottsdale Air Park Global Medical Systems. These, however, will test for THC, which, as you saw, is being vaped even more frequently than nicotine e-liquid. Also, if you do grab one, please grab the sheet that says before you test, because there's a very specific way to approach these. We do not advocate this being used as a gotcha or in a heavy-handed way or as a disciplinary measure. If this is approached in a negative way, this will become a negative thing. Please do not take one of these kits and walk into your teen's room tonight and go like this with it. This can be used as part of a reward system. Rather than the focus being on what's the punishment for a positive test, how about the gaining or the maintaining of a privilege for negative or clean tests? I know a dad whose son turned 16, wanted to use the family car, and the dad said, I completely believe you're not using drugs, but if I'm putting you on the streets of Phoenix in our car, I have to be 100% sure. I'm going to test you. When you come back clean, let's get your license. And maintaining that privilege will come with periodic tests. I don't know, once a month, once every 2 months, whenever I feel like it. And here's what I like best. That gives them an out. That gives them a way to say no and save face with their peers. They can blame it on us. I'd love to smoke that with you. I can't. My parents are crazy. They drug test me. And if I come back positive, I can't hang out with you anymore. It's not about me. It's about them. My daughter is 7 years old, so we're not quite at this point yet. That's a little ambitious. But when she is hitting those middle school years where that temptation begins, if it keeps her off of drugs and if it keeps her healthy and safe, I'll be the uncool dad. She can blame it on me all she wants. And please, if you have your phones, please take a picture of this. We are 15 episodes into our podcast. The response has been excellent. That web address is the direct address where it's hosted. But as you see below, if you already listen to podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Alexa, Spotify, etc., you can find the podcast there as well. All of the topics that we speak on that you saw in that interdependence model, we have podcasts on. While we talk about the problem and the scope of the problem, we are much more heavily focused on the solution. Some of them are heavy topics, but we are very positive and inspirational with the messages that we use. Also, we have a few episodes with some parenting experts, talking about things that don't even necessarily have to do with drugs or alcohol, increasing family communication, etc. And then finally, if you got a survey with your packet, if you missed my name at the beginning where it says presenter name, or it says presenter right here, my name is Shane Watson. Shane Watson. If you liked the presentation, if not, my name is Jeff Smith. And while you're filling that out, first and foremost, thank you so much for your time. I will be around here for a little while later. If you have some questions that you wanted to ask, feel free to grab multiple kits. We have 2 cases of 36 here. Please come by and take a look at the devices. And I will be down here in just a couple minutes. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me. I appreciate it. Have a great night.